Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello, welcome to Cannabis Common Sense in our hemp news segment. We're still out of the studio and plugging along here. As long as Portland schools are closed, our studio will be closed. That's the general policy at Open Signal, the local studio we use, part of Portland's cable access network.
I feel the force.
Our first story this evening is from Jackson, Mississippi. More than 8 in 10 Mississippi voters endorse medical marijuana legalization and most prefer the more liberal of the state's 2 pending ballot measures. According to polling data released on Wednesday, 81% of respondents, including 89% of Democrats and 76% of Republicans, favor, quote, allowing patients with medical conditions and serious illnesses to possess and consume marijuana if their doctors recommend it, end quote. Mississippi voters this fall will decide on a pair of competing ballot measures, Initiative 65 and Alternative 65A. The first measure was placed on the ballot at the behest of voters, while the latter is a more restrictive proposal that was advanced by the Mississippi legislature. When providing information about both measures, 63% of respondents endorsed Initiative 65, while only 18% preferred Alternative 65A, the government's proposal. So the people mightily back the Citizens Initiative. Voters in South Dakota will also be deciding on medicalization initiatives in November. And in Nebraska, the Secretary of State certified that the initiative proponents gathered enough signatures to qualify a medical marijuana legalization measure for the ballot there. Adult use ballot initiatives have qualified for the ballots in New Jersey, Arizona, Montana, and South Dakota. So coming this November, we'll have a number of votes, only about 6-8 weeks away. More information on Initiative 65's campaign in Mississippi is available online. Farther north, Maine's marijuana regulatory body announced this week that it had finally issued the state's first round of cannabis business licenses, with weeks until retail sales are set to launch. This development comes nearly 4 years after Maine's voters approved the legalization ballot measure, a significant delay in implementation compared to California, Massachusetts, and Nevada, which also legalized for adult use on the same day in 2016. Maine's Office of Marijuana Policy, or OMP, first announced last month that sales would be launching soon, while licensed retailers won't be able to sell cannabis products to consumers until October 9th. The new licenses will be able to cultivate and process marijuana as soon as possible to ensure a smooth rollout. Seems a little late for October 9th to me. Retailers also expected to develop public safety policies to prevent the transmission of the coronavirus. According to the OMP there in Maine, the Office of Maine Marijuana Policy, quote, Maine will have the unique distinction of being the only state to launch its adult use marijuana program during a pandemic. Public health and safety are themes that have been part of the Office of Marijuana Policy's mission statement since day one. Accordingly, our highest priority remains the well-being of this new industry's employees and consumers, end quote. Maine's Office of Marijuana Policy said it had approved licenses for 3 cultivars, 2 cannabis shops, and 1 testing facility. Regulators are actively in the process of reviewing additional licensees. The body had previously said it would plan to launch retail sales last April, but that timeline was pushed back due to the pandemic. Next story is from our neighbor to the south, out of Sacramento, California. California lawmakers have passed legislation, Assembly Bill 1525, that seeks to encourage banks and other financial institutions to partner with licensed cannabis businesses. The bill reads, quote, an entity that receives deposits, extends credits, conducts fund transfers, transports cash or financial instruments, or provides other financial services does not commit a crime under any California law solely by the virtue of the fact that the person receiving the benefits of any of those services engages in commercial cannabis activity as a licensee pursuant to this division, end quote. The measure now goes to California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom for final approval. Few banks or other financial institutions provide services to state licensed cannabis businesses because these relationships are discouraged under federal regulations. In recent months, members of the U.S. House of Representatives on multiple occasions have passed legislation on the House floor amending federal law to explicitly permit banks to legally engage in such partnerships. However, none of these measures have been seriously considered by the Senate back in Washington, D.C. Personally, I've been through, based on my medical clinic, helping medical marijuana patients, I've been through 20 different bank closures since 2007. 18 of those, they said they could not tell me why my account was being closed, and they didn't have to have a reason to close it. Only twice did they say it was because of my helping medical marijuana patients. Even our doctors have had their accounts closed with no explanation. Our next story is from the Midwest. Iowa plans to seek an official exemption from federal marijuana prohibition in an effort to resolve policy conflicts impending its limited medical cannabis program. The Iowa State Department of Public Health recently determined that it will proceed with an application asking the Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA, for a formal exemption under the Controlled Substances Act in an effort to prevent the loss of federal funding it receives for education and long-term care facilities. Iowa's market could see additional inadvertent benefits if the application is approved, however, advocates say. Quote, there's no guarantee the DEA will do anything with that or respond to us, but we'll move forward with doing our best to minimize that conflict between state and federal law, end quote. The chair of Iowa's Medical Cannabidiol Board said at a meeting last week. If the DEA approved Iowa's application, it could do more than provide the specific protections that lawmakers requested. According to Carl Olson, a longtime cannabis reform advocate in Iowa, getting an exemption would also free up marijuana businesses' access to financial institutions, resolve tax burdens that are unique to the industry, and help promote research into cannabis. Iowa's medical cannabis program is more limited than those have been in other established states, allowing only for low THC and CBD focused products to be obtained by registered patients. Our next story is from Washington, D.C. The United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA, recently took to Twitter to publicize a $200,000 grant it awarded to researchers investigating whether or not feeding hemp to livestock leads to unacceptable concentrations of cannabinoids, resulting in food for human consumption. Scientists at Kansas State University are conducting the studies, which will help inform policies on whether hemp can safely be used in animal feed. As it stands, the practice is prohibited despite the federal legalization of hemp and its derivatives. Little is known about the effects of cannabinoids on cattle, as most studies have focused on humans, mice, and pigs. But a new main reason for the new research is that there are concerns that feeding hemp to livestock could potentially result in high concentrations of THC in meat or milk sold commercially. That's really ridiculous, but okay. Kansas State University's Michael Kleinheinz, who's part of the multidisciplinary team behind the study, said, quote, our goal is to fill in knowledge gaps. Until feedstuffs containing hemp are established as safe in animals, our data will assist producers in managing situations involving intentional or unintentional hemp exposure. Industrial hemp is typically grown to produce oil, seed, fiber, and medicines, while varieties of hemp may be planted for a single or dual purpose, such as for seed and fiber. byproducts consisting of leaves, fodder, and residual plant fibers remain after harvest. These byproducts could serve as potential feedstuffs for animals. Because these are predominantly cellulose containing a plant material, the ideal species for utilizing these feeds are ruminant animals, specifically cattle. End quote. So far, the team has completed 2 preliminary studies using USDA funds. One paper, which was published in the journal Nature in July, concluded, quote, the CBDA, THCA, CBDVA, and CBCA were detected in all cattle after industrial hemp dosing. These results show acidic cannabinoids, especially CBDA, are readily absorbed from the rumen and available for distribution throughout the cattle body. End quote. Follow-up research will examine the effects of hemp foods on animal behavior and immune function. Kleinheinz, referring to one of the 4 bovine stomachs, said, quote, now that we've found that some cannabinoids are readily absorbed from the rumen, the next steps are to study the tissue and milk residue depletion profiles of the compounds after animal feeding experiments, end quote. Researchers believe that if farmers were able to use leftover parts of hemp plants as cattle feed, it would make the cultivation of the crop more economical and could boost the industry globally. Hans Kotizzi, also with the Kansas State University, said, quote, we don't believe that the degree of absorption is sufficient for us to be concerned about potential intoxication following the consumption of meat and milk. If we can prove that is of no concern of consequence to the consumer, we feel that it would remove one of the major impediments to the widespread production of hemp worldwide, end quote. The USDA Agriculture and Food Research Initiative competitive grant being used by the researchers is another example of how the federal agency is prioritizing hemp since its legalization under the 2018 Farm Bill. Meanwhile, as scientists work to better understand the crop and its derivatives, USDA is actively developing regulations for the industry. Last week, it announced that a public comment period on its proposed rules for hemp is being reopened due to widespread interest and feedback from stakeholders. Our last story tonight is kind of amusing out of Israel. Israel cannabis advocates representing the Green Drone Telegram group dropped hundreds of plastic baggies containing 2 grams of cannabis flower over Tel Aviv, Israel this week, according to an article in the Jerusalem Post. Before the event, activists published a statement via Telegram, an online messaging platform, that hinted at their plan. It said, quote, it's time, my dear brothers. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's the green drone handing out free cannabis from the sky. Enjoy, my beloved brothers. This is your pilot brother, making sure we all get some free love, end quote. Green Drone Cannabis Group via the Jerusalem Post posted that. Passers-by were recorded picking up baggies off the streets and sidewalks surrounding Rabin Square in downtown Tel Aviv. Some even stepped through busy traffic to retrieve baggies from the street. The activists hinted that this was only the first such cannabis airdrop. They said, quote, we're launching the Reign of Cannabis project that will include a weekly delivery to different parts of the country of 1 kilo of cannabis divided into free 2-gram bags, end quote, the Green Drone program said on Telegram. The group may face legal repercussions, however, and police said shortly after the incident they'd arrested 2 individuals who were suspected of operating the drone. Medical cannabis is allowed in Israel, but adult use cannabis remains illegal. Lawmakers, however, recently signaled support for proposed federal legalization policies in Israel. That is the end of our hemp news segment for tonight. We have more videos, so until the top of the hour, so stay tuned. Thanks, and help restore hemp.
We did this out of necessity because we needed to do what we needed to do because we needed to do it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Yeah. So yeah, we'll just go for it. You know, there's no I can't. This needs to be done. You know. So anyway, I don't know what value that has, but it has some value somewhere if you really think about it. Hustling. hustling on down hustling street. Rag man, rag woman, paper bags full. Street age alert in tenant child's eyes. Sidewalk playgrounds, got to beware. Young man's in the shadows, dealing his junk. Beautiful sisters deal themselves around. Beautiful brothers not so beautiful anymore. Ain't everybody tired of being poor? Message in a scroll, message on the wall. Something's wrong, not our fault. We gotta be cool, our time will come. Open spaces on shopping center wall. Middle class man, middle class land. Clean enough to be a family affair. Nice place to take wide-eyed child. Controlled climate. Neat little shops all laid out. Everything for sale by cash or plastic. Price not negotiable, but payment is. Different junk, man. Different junk. Spend some money. Buy some more. Message in a scroll, message on the wall. Graffiti man's got something to say. Put on blinders, dull the senses. Who's worth more than money they spend? Skyscraper building, corporate quarter, office suite, executive board, high finance, big businessman suit, not stained by sweat or blood, using money like perfume water. Sophistication smiles I'd stain and decay. Dividing profits among themselves. Spoils of war, or spoils of war, says junk man, owner of the junk. Message in the scroll, message on the wall. Down with bosses, down with bosses. No more bosses, no more bosses. Jesse Ed Davis. Jesse Ed. Long live Jesse Ed. Long live Jesse Ed.
The Israeli scientist, I think his name's Raphael
McCollum.
He's the one who discovered THC about 25 years ago and then discovered the receptor sites, or at least worked on the team of.
Worked on those and has also been involved in some of the endogenous cannabinoids, the natural substances we all have in our brains and bodies as well. Still very active.
Right.
Excuse me, are those comparable to endorphins or
Well, they're a different group of chemicals, also endogenous though, that use different receptors. There are different receptors for the opioids, morphine and codeine, those two substances. So the endorphins are among these agents that help energize the neurons to put out transmitters in various centers of the brain. And cannabinoids, or the components of the marijuana leaf, are yet another system, pharmacological system.
So that endogenous system, I think they call it the endorphin-like substances, anandamides, is that the problem?
Anandamide is the
Anandamides,
one
okay.
that is best developed. It also uses the so-called CB1 receptor, cannabinoid 1 receptor, and such as THC does. And then there's another one that's 2AG, arachidonyl-glycerol, which is another of these endogenous cannabinoid-like substances.
Have they identified the primary action of this receptor system? Is it...
There are many actions, actually. The receptors have been identified and cloned, actually, and they can be sited or located in various parts of the brain that have to do with pain perception, with movement control, with control of vomiting, with warm and pleasant feelings, with sedation, and so forth. So they're very common throughout the brain.
So that there is a definite, what shall we say, therapeutic action of these substances. Would that be?
Well,
I mean,
I wouldn't say
the actions that you mentioned seem to me to be therapeutic in nature, or could be therapeutic.
Well, they might be exploited for therapeutic uses, that's correct, because there are these systems
Yes.
in place. And that's the reason, I'm sure, that people have found some utility for the use of these cannabinoid substances.
Before the president of the Institute of Medicine asked you to be a co-investigator, can you tell us about the process that led up to the Institute of Medicine conducting this inquiry?
Yes, the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, which is directed by Barry McCaffrey, asked the Institute to consider such a study and was willing to fund it. About the same time, a major foundation also thought this would be worthy of study, but the Institute thought it better, and so did apparently General McCaffrey, if only the one sponsor were responsible. And so a proposal was made to his office by the Institute staff, which led to a statement of task, so-called, and then the funding of the study.
What was the mandate from the Office of National Drug Control Policy on didn't they exclude, they just wanted the medical report, nothing to do with science or social policy?
The science, yes. They wanted the scientific basis for any benefits or harms that might come from the medical use of marijuana or its component substances. And we were not restricted, but we were not picked either to address issues of social, legislative, regulatory, etc. kinds of considerations. I think it would have been a very different statement of task and a very different group. It would not have included me.
Were you involved at all? I know that the Institute of Medicine produced a report 15 years before regarding marijuana, not specifically as medicine.
There
you must
was
have reviewed that.
Oh, absolutely. And I was not. That was in 1982. And it was frustrated by the lack of clear science, rigorous experimentation, and called repeatedly for research in various fields. In the meantime, there's been a explosion of knowledge in the basic science field. All of these anandamide and receptors and neurotransmitters and citing of these things in various control areas in the brain have been elaborated. So we were at a distinct advantage over the people who did that study. And we hope we carried things a bit further because of that new science.
Mm-hmm. Could you address that explosion in science and discovery of the receptor system a bit for our audience?
Well, it really was the identification of the receptors themselves, cloning them, citing them wherever they were found, both in the brain and peripherally. The CB2, the cannabinoid 2 receptor, is primarily in the immune system and more peripheral nervous system, and CB1 is primarily in the brain. These endogenous cannabinoid-like substances that I've mentioned were elaborated, and a good deal of just straight pharmacology done on them, so that we had the advantage of, for example, showing the effects in animals on pain, and showing the effects on control of motion, things of that nature, from these basic science advances. They were really quite remarkable and pretty exciting to an internist clinician like myself who had no idea they had existed.
In the late 1980s, scientists would discover the endocannabinoid system within the human body. Now, this would lay waste to claims for decades. The cannabinoids had no beneficial purpose for human consumption.
Obesity, particularly abdominal obesity and the associated cardiometabolic complications, are critical areas of investigation. The endocannabinoid system helps to regulate the central control of energy balance and peripheral metabolic processes, both of which may contribute to cardiometabolic risk factors. The endocannabinoid system, or ECS, influences multiple physiologic processes. This intricate system modulates energy intake, as well as nutrient transport, metabolism, and storage. The ECS regulates these processes through endogenous ligands, such as anandamide and 2-arachidonylglycerol, and the CB1 receptor. CB1 receptors are located in the brain, digestive tract, muscle, and adipose tissue. Integration of these central and peripheral ECS components is achieved through neuronal and hormonal signaling. Within the brain, CB1 receptors are among the most abundant G-protein coupled receptors. However, in contrast to classical signaling, where information travels from pre- to post-synaptic neurons, the ECS uses retrograde signaling. The information travels from post to presynaptic neuron. Let's take a closer look at this mechanism using a glutamatergic neuron model. When an action potential reaches the axon terminal, membrane depolarization triggers the release of glutamate. Glutamate binds to postsynaptic glutamate receptors, inducing calcium channels to open. During periods of intense neural activity, calcium accumulates in the postsynaptic neuron. This calcium buildup causes the synthesis and release of endocannabinoids from membrane lipids. Diffusing across the synaptic cleft, the endocannabinoids bind to the CB1 receptor, activating the G proteins. Activation influences ion flow. The result, suppression of presynaptic neurotransmitter release. Endocannabinoids are subsequently taken back into the cell and enzymatically degraded. In addition to acting as neural messengers, endocannabinoids mediate paracrine and autocrine signaling in adipocytes hepatocytes, and other cells. Endocannabinoid system activity in the central nervous system regulates food intake. For example, ECS stimulation by hunger and fasting signals stimulates appetite and increases the palatability of food. Endocannabinoids slow gastric emptying and GI transit and appear to stimulate secretion of ghrelin, a neuropeptide that increases appetite and food intake. After eating, cholecystokinin in the duodenum triggers satiety signals. Subsequently, ECS activity is decreased through suppression of CB1 expression. An increase in the adiposity hormone leptin decreases endocannabinoid levels in the hypothalamus and decreases food intake. ECS regulation of peripheral metabolism influences energy balance. Stimulation of the ECS increases food intake and adiposity. Conversely, blocking CB1 receptors reduces food intake and adiposity. In the liver, ECS stimulation can lead to lipogenesis through the activation of hepatic lipogenic enzymes and increased fatty acid synthesis. Chronic stimulation of the ECS is associated with dyslipidemia. Activation of CB1 receptors increases expression of SREBP1C, a lipogenic transcription factor, and increases fatty acid synthesis. SREBP1C increases production of lipogenic enzymes, ACC1, and fatty acid synthase. Increased fatty acid synthesis can lead to production of large triglyceride-rich VLDL. Large triglyceride-rich VLDL sets the stage for the atherogenic lipid profile of small, dense LDL, decreased levels of atheroprotective HDL, and overall increases in cholesterol and triglyceride levels. Adiponectin, another hormone secreted by adipocytes, regulates lipid and glucose metabolism. Adiponectin is believed to regulate fatty acid oxidation in muscle and liver, thus improving insulin sensitivity. CB1 receptor stimulation in adipocytes reduces adiponectin, while CB1 blockade increases adiponectin synthesis. Metabolic dysregulation leads to a constellation of symptoms including abdominal obesity, atherogenic dyslipidemia, hypertension, insulin resistance, prothrombotic state, and pro-inflammatory state. As basic and clinical research progresses, we will continue to increase our understanding of the central and peripheral endocannabinoid system and its role in the regulation of metabolic function.
There you have it, in one plain video. Cannabis could be mankind's symbiotic plant. Until next time, I'm William Martin with Cannabis Science.
Got your PhD from the University of Oregon Medical School, which
Yes.
is now known as Oregon Health Sciences University.
That's right, yes.
And while you were there, I know you told me the story about finding huge gallon jars of cannabis in the cupboard.
Yes. When I started as a grad student at the medical school, Dr. David, the chairman of pharmacology, says, "Levesque, I'd like you to go in and straighten out the stock room. Whatever, just straighten it out." And the first thing I found was a gallon jug of cannabis cough medicine. And at that time, it was illegal for cannabis of any sort to be anywhere. And this was 13 years after 1937 or so, something like that.
Yeah, about 1950.
And it was manufactured by Park Davis.
Uh-huh.
And so I said, well, if Park Davis paid me to go to medical school. So I just said, if Park Davis says this stuff is good for cough medicine, it must be good. So I poured myself a pint of it like this, and it's probably out in my barn someplace, and it's probably still good.
All right, all right, that's a great story. This is an Eli Lilly container. We're going to do our little show and tell here. Here are several cannabis-based products. This one is Sunny Hemp from Nature's Path. You can pick these up at most local grocery stores, not drugstores, but grocery stores. And so they're nifty little hemp bars. Next door, we have Emerald Empire Hemp Munch toasted hemp seeds. Emerald, the hemp company of America, is based right here in wonderful Oregon, and it's a tasty snack. Right next door, we have a hemp tea product. I used to drink these in Switzerland back in the late 90s, and marijuana was actually legal in Switzerland from 1997 to 2002, when an initiative made the ballot in Switzerland. Switzerland invented the initiative process. It went into effect from 97, was voted down 52 to 48% in 2002. The United States DEA spent about $10 million to defeat it. That's in a country of 4 million Swiss voters. So our federal government went in there. The Drug Enforcement Administration spent $10 million to make sure the Swiss hemp bill lost, and it did.
I feel safer.
So, yeah. And so next door we have a embossed bottle of Dr. Craddock's Cannabis Indica. I don't know if you can see it on there. Well, you guys with the HD TV, you probably, oh yeah, there it is.
Nice,
Cannabis
nice.
Indica.
Nice.
From Dr. Craddock of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Right next door, we have a full bottle, speaking of cough syrup, of Linden's Cough Balsam. And it is, it's got about a dozen different languages on it. It's
Mostly Polish.
most Polish and Eastern European languages. Right next door, we have a, what is this? This is the glycerophosphates compound with lecithin, a reconstructive tonic and nerve food. And the number one ingredient is Cannabis Indica.
Nice, nice.
And then here we have two bottles. There's one still in the box that's unopened, and I'm not going to open that because it's a lot more valuable. And this one just has some residue inside. This is the Lloyd Brothers Cannabis Extract. So that's another nifty thing that shows its medical utility. And last but not least, we have Eli Lilly's pint bottle, fluid extract number 96. They had about a dozen different cannabis compounds, including powdered hashish and fluid extracts and tinctures, and then they mixed it just like this other one, the glyphosate nervine. They mixed it with several other things, so it wasn't uncommon to find these nerve potions that included cannabis. And so there it is from Eli Lilly.
That is insulated, and that is much quieter. Anytime you move air, it's going to cause some vibration and noise. So if you insulate it, it keeps the noise inside and everything stays quiet. And here we have another sleeping bag here, and we've got the output air here coming through this 4-inch vent, and then here's another little comforter up here to kind of plug a hole and keep everything from shaking off the map. Okay, here on the wall we've got a product that's similar to styrofoam. It's called Clad Mat, and what this does is it not only insulates the room from the outside hot and cold, but it also deadens the sound, which is key, very important, because you can look at this. It's about 1.5 inches thick, and it's perfect for this application. It doesn't get wet. Well, if it gets wet, it sheds the moisture, it can take the hot, it can take the cold, and it insulates. Okay, and then notice that they've also plugged all of the small little holes here with this expandable foam that you just put in with the aerosol can, and it expands, and that fills all of the gaps. So when you put this together, you don't have to do it as tight. You can be a little sloppy and everything works fine. And it's just simply fastened with these little sheetrock screws, and it goes up and nothing flat. I love this stuff. I've seen it used all over the world, and I hope to see a lot more of it. Let's talk a little bit about how this system works. First, we've got the growing medium, which is hydroton or expanded clay pellets. There's all kinds of different brands of these. Okay? The plant is moved from from being a clone like this, but obviously there are going to be roots down to about here, and it's put into this container, and then the roots grow down into the reservoir. Okay? This is a reservoir and a pot all in one. The water or nutrient solution is delivered from this ring in drips. There's like 6 or 7 different drippers or holes all the way around here, so the entire medium gets wet. Okay? And then the water drips down through into this reservoir. Okay? And notice the roots. This is very interesting on this one because we've got very, very white roots and dark brown roots. The white roots are alive and healthy, very strong. The brown roots are starting to rot and they're going to die pretty soon. And these roots really don't do the plant much good. So remember, when you look at your roots, they should be nice and white like this, not dark or brown. Very important. Now if we can take a look here at this reservoir, we can tell the reservoir is about half full. Okay, and we can also tell because of this drain pipe here that we just turn and drain all the water out, or nutrient solution. We can tell the water level comes up to here. So no matter what, we can tell how deep the water is in here. Now let's see. Now there's also a pipe that goes down into here. This pipe comes from the top up here, and it goes down into the reservoir. And in the middle of this pipe is this little tube. This tube is hooked to an air pump. So the air pump continually bubbles and bubbles and bubbles the water in here and continually oxygenates it, which will make the nutrients uptake faster. Very important. Real simple. You could also call this a deep water culture container. There's several kinds of deep water culture, and that's a method of hydroponics. Sometimes you'll have a medium like this where you have quite a bit of medium. This has several liters of medium in it. And there's other kinds of deep water culture that only have just a little net pot like this planted right here, and the roots hang down into the nutrient solution. And the big principle with the deep water culture is the water is very deep in the reservoir like this, or in the second pot, and there's always an air pump in there that continually bubbles and bubbles and bubbles and puts more oxygen into the system. That's the principle. It's real simple and easy. Once you crank it up, you just keep that bubbler going all the time, and it oxygenates everything. The plant uses all the nutrient it needs, all the water it needs, and they work great. Now across the bottom here, this little gully here, this is algae. It's full of algae. Algae will grow anywhere there's nutrient solution and light. It looks like they put a little bit of a powder up here, or a clay up here. What this clay does is it covers the top of the rock wool cube and it impairs the algae growing. And the algae, like I said, causes very few problems, but what it does actually is it attracts fungus gnats. Fungus gnats won't cause problem for quite a while, but when they do, they start eating your roots turn rotten, and you've got problems. So that's a real good reason to stay away from algae. When a light goes off in your head, it's usually a high pressure sodium or a metal halide. But I'll tell you, there's another kind of light. What he's got here is a bank of 8 fluorescent lamps that are about 40 inches long or 1 meter, and about 36 inches across. With these lamps, or with these fluorescents, he's illuminating about a 6 by 6 area. And it's full of clones. They're all incredibly healthy. And then around here, around the side, are the mother plants. Compact fluorescent lamps have advantages and disadvantages. These 36 watt compact fluorescents are very bright. In fact, they're almost as bright in lumen per watt terms as a metal halide lamp. But with only 36 watts, they just don't throw as much light as far as a metal halide. That's a bit of a disadvantage because you've got to have so many of them to cover an area. That means you've got to have all the framework, everything, move them up and down. They're easy to get wet. You've got more connections to make. Just generally more stuff to have in your garden. To get the most light from them, you've got to keep your plants right up next to them, within this range here. But at the same time, you can see I can put my hand right up here next to the lamp and it's not hot at all. That's an advantage. You can get your plants really close. They work really well for a lot of applications. Say you're in a small space and you want to have your plants about this tall, or they're not going to grow much taller than a foot. You can use compact fluorescents definitely to your advantage. And as well, say you only need to use 3 or 4 of them, where you can keep your wattage way down and your heat signature way down. Very important in a lot of situations. I like to use them for clones. They're really bright, but you can keep a lot of clones underneath them. Very efficient in that way. And also, right here you can see exactly how well they illuminate the entire garden, and especially the mothers. These mothers are, well, let's see, I'd call that about 2.5 feet away. And check this mother out. It is strong all the way down to the bottom. So it gets adequate light, but not enough to make it bloom really well, because these are still in the vegetative stage and they just don't need as much light as a blooming plant. So for mothers and clones, excellent. Vegetative plants, excellent. But for flowering, you've got to keep the plants right up next to the compact fluorescents to get the most out of them. So we're driving along in the Spanish countryside. We can't find the grow room we're looking for. We stop and ask for directions. And what happens? This guy says, "Oye, hay que mirar mi cultivo." And I said, "What? What are you talking about?" And what that means, excuse me, what that means is, hey, you got to see what I'm growing. So we decided to take a look. I like to call this a subsistence garden because we've got tomatoes, we've got peppers, we've got onions, we've got squash, we've got pepinos, or cucumbers they call them. Back here we've got roses. Up here we have rosemary or romero. We have the English ivy back here. And I love this granada plant. It's wonderful. Behind the cameraman, we've got all kinds of olives. There's lemon trees and orange trees up over here. This is lovely. I love the way they've planted here. Here we've got lavender in the front. I love lavender. So do all the ladies. And bumblebees, these are from America, by the way. They weren't native to Spain. And then we've got tomatoes through here. And then let's walk around over here. This is great design work here. The kiwi is grown in alongside the plant. But notice the leaves aren't so big on the kiwi that it shades anything from the marijuana plant. Okay, we've got all these things, but as you can tell, the most important plant in this garden is the cannabis, because it's a subsistence garden. So I asked the grower, I say, hey, what do you use for fertilizer? I mean, you must have this great fertilizer. And he goes, well, I'll tell you, we've got these horses over there in the pasture and we just throw a little horse shit on here and it seems to work for us all right. And I said, well, how long have you been doing that? And he says, to tell you the truth, I just can't remember. It's been so long. So I grabbed this hoe right here and started digging to see what kind of soil we have. And I dig and I dig. I can hear and feel the rocks in here, but I don't see any clay at all. And I keep digging in this soil and it goes down. I'm starting to hit clay at about 6 inches. So my guess, oh yeah, got a little bit of clay in this soil, but see how it breaks up like that? It's got plenty of rocks in it, plenty of minerals. This year they put about 6 centimeters or 2 inches of horse manure on here. Other years they put pig manure, chicken manure, and cow manure. Well, what do you do if you don't live in the Spanish countryside and have a herd of horses next door to gather manure from? Well, you can find manure all over the place. The best kinds of manure are going to be barnyard manure because it's mixed with urine, and that will give you a lot more nitrogen in your mix and a lot more trace elements as well. And always mulch. These leaves just rot right down and form fertilizer. They put nitrogen and carbon and energy back into the soil. This is a real good thing. It saves water, keeps water from evaporating off of the surface, and when the rain comes down and hits it hard, it keeps the surface from forming a hard layer on the top. And what that does is really the water is able to penetrate evenly down into the soil. Real important stuff. And it's all natural. You don't have to do much. Like he said, we just throw a little horse shit out here once in a while and it works for us. You know, in my monthly columns in High Times magazine, Jorge's RX, I get all kinds of questions from people asking me, how do I grow the best tomatoes? Well, I'll tell you, I don't know a lot about tomatoes, but what I do know is a little bit about how to grow these plants back here. They just put them in right alongside all of these tomatoes. As you can see, it's been a real wet year, so these tomatoes are rotting. But it doesn't seem to affect the cannabis at all. They've got about 50 plants in this row, and this row goes down there about 25, maybe 30 feet. They're going to have a nice big harvest here. What they've done on the other side is put up plastic so as to disguise the plants. People really don't see through that plastic very well. And this is just stuck out here in the middle of a tomato garden, and nobody really thinks about it because it's a private property. So you can get away with all kinds of things. All you have to do is think a little bit. Why would you want to tie your girls down like this? Are you into bondage? Well, sort of. The reason is real simple. You get more dope because the light is more even across the top, the buds go out to the sides, and you get more air circulation inside. He's just used these real simple little knots here that he can tie and untie real quickly, but he also leaves them real loose around the branch so it doesn't cut any of the circulation of the plant fluid off. And then here along the bottom, he's just punched a little hole right in the side of this container and put a quick little slip knot in here. And actually this is a double half hitch. So what he can do is tie and untie this real quickly, and it makes it real easy to move these branches around. And this plant, well, it's a Buddha Sister G13 Haze cross. So you've got really heavy, dense foliage, and by spreading it out like this, it's going to grow more dope. Look at this branch here. If this branch was straight up, it wouldn't have as much sun. Now if we look at this tall plant over here, it's really tied down. This is mainly, well, it's all sativa. It's a cross, a Malawi, Colombian, Thai, and Jamaican cross. So that's sativa all the way. That's why the plant's so much taller. But notice he's pulled the branches down quite a bit more than on the dominantly, or the heavy indica plant here. And it's really made quite a difference, because otherwise this plant would be another 2 feet tall, and in most locations that's not a good thing. And if you're growing indoors, it's incredibly good to tie them down like this, because you keep an even profile and the light is able to penetrate inside this plant here. And that's why I like to tie things down. Well, we've got to be just a little bit quiet in this garden because there's neighbors on all sides. So we'll just play it real slow and quiet. In here, we've got another 4 plants. It's quite interesting. What the grower's done is he's taken this fence and stuck it around these posts, picked it up from the bottom, slid it up here, and done that here, here, and at the end, and as well on the other side. Some places it didn't fit, so he had to make it longer, and he had to make a knot. But what this gives him is a trellis that he can slide up and down. And it's real convenient when you do this. And it's very, very simple. Much better than putting a trellis with hooks, because you can't move it once the hooks or eye bolts are in place. Now also what he's done is once the plants get taller, he just simply puts them up, puts the posts up on blocks. We're up about 4 or 5 inches here. He'll put it up another 4 or 5 inches. By the time he harvests, it'll probably be up to about here. And now, since we're down here, let's take a look at these pots. These are 15, 18-gallon pots, it looks like. They're full of soil. They get watered heavily every day. Notice that he's taken this monofilament line and stretched around here to contain the buds. Because one of the problems he's having already is the buds are so big that they're falling over. And they've got another 4 to 5 weeks before harvest. Now, here's what they do with some of the buds. They put them on these little yo-yos like this, because otherwise, as you can see, this bud would be all the way down there. So he lets it come up, or he uses this yo-yo, keeps it totally up, out of the way, growing towards the sunlight. Holy smokes! Now, where am I? God. Whoa. I must have fallen asleep out here or something. I don't know, man. We were drinking all that good wine from Navarra, and that's all we remember. Whoa, what the hell? Gee, oh, I remember. Now I remember. Estamos en mi. Okay, we're in the.
This is called Metaganja. Rose by any name is still a rose.
All right.
Me like Metaganja. Ganja. We like to use Metaganja. Food and medicine, prohibition must end. Metaganja. That's right. Ganja. You want Metaganja. Ganja, you want to grow